Let's rage here and say it's going to cost $50,000 for every small business. That's a bunch of hooey. You know, my state, like I say, we have a 3-page application. So the point is we can do something real. We can influence the EPA, get reasonable regulations, and protect the drinking water of this country, or you can do what you're doing here today, which is meaningless.
The gentlelady from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to recognize the good gentleman from Oklahoma, the chairman of the Agricultural Committee, Mr. Lucas.
Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this bill and ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, the piece of legislation before us today must be passed and placed on the President's desk as soon as possible if we want to prevent a possible blitz of regulatory burdens on our farmers and ranchers. The 6-month delay that the EPA was granted by the court this past Monday evening may have brought us more time, but the delay does not fix the underlying problem. The impact on those pesticide users who will be required to obtain a duplicative permit will be the same in October as it is today. There's no difference in the burden, the cost, or the real impact on their livelihoods. The only thing this extension provides farmers is 6 more months of regulatory uncertainty. We must act now to give our farmers the certainty they need to continue to produce the safest, most affordable, abundant food supply in the history of the world. If Congress does not act, more than 40 states will face increased financial and administrative burdens in order to comply with the new permitting requirement process during a time when many states are already being forced to make difficult budget decisions. This would be a crushing blow to an already fragile economy. Giving EPA and the states more time to develop a permit system does nothing to minimize the unnecessary expenses this uninformed court decision has imposed. Governments at all levels are facing fiscal emergency. This exercise represents a tremendous waste of valuable time and resources. There's no need to send our states down a path of physical disaster when we have the opportunity to put a stop to it all today. It was always the intent of Congress to exempt pesticide use from the Clean Water Act. The decision of the court represents a fundamental ignorance of congressional intent that will not be rectified by a delay. Congress has no choice but to act now. I'd like to serve note that on the Ag Committee, as chairman, I'm very pleased with our point person's efforts on this behalf, subcommittee, the chairwoman, Jean Schmidt. I'd like to thank our ranking member, Mr. Peterson, of the full committee, and subcommittee ranking member, Mr. Braca, for working with us in a very bipartisan way to address this issue. We all agree something has to be done. Something needs to be done, and we have an opportunity to do it. With that, I encourage my colleagues to vote in support of this legislation, and I yield back the remainder of my time to Subcommittee Chairwoman Schmidt.
The gentlelady from Ohio reserves the balance of her time. And the gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume, and I rise in
gentleman is recognized.
I rise in reluctant opposition to H.R. 872. Mr. Speaker, I find myself in an awkward position here today, being asked to urgently vote on a bill where there is no real sense of urgency and where questions of its potential impact on human health and the environment far outweigh the answers. I am also concerned that in our efforts to address concerns on the implementation of 2 federal statutes, we are neglecting a rational analysis of the best way to protect human health and the environment from the potential adverse effects of pesticides. Finally, I stand in opposition to this legislation because it appears that the push to vote today on this bill is so great that it has stretched the bounds of traditional member-to-member commitments to resolve legitimate differences on issues of critical importance to all of us. Mr. Speaker, let me state from the outset that I agree pesticides provide a valuable tool in controlling unwanted pests, whether they be mosquitoes in my home county of Suffolk County in New York or corn borers in the Midwest. This bill is not about whether pesticides should or should not be used. However, what this bill does call into question is the best way to balance the use of pesticides with the protection of water quality, human health and the environment, and the economic benefits associated with them. On this point, I am not convinced that the current efforts to protect human health and the environment, which this bill seeks to maintain, are sufficient. If they were, pesticides would not continually show up in the urban and rural water bodies throughout the nation. As states and the U.S. Geological Survey have told us, pesticides are frequently detected in streams and groundwater throughout the nation, and literally thousands of streams and bays and lakes are currently impaired or threatened by pesticides. In the state of California alone, pesticides are listed as the #1 source of water quality impairment in the state. It is also telling that many states continue to find waters impaired by pesticides that have been banned in the United States for decades. In my view, this shows how the decisions we make today will have a long-term impact on human health, on our environment, and create long-lasting implications and potentially increase costs for generations to come. According to the EPA, the potential human health implications of pesticide exposure depend on the type of pesticide and on the pathway, concentration, and duration of exposure, and can range from minor skin irritations to developmental concerns being linked to cancer. One potentially significant source of exposure comes from consuming pesticide-contaminated drinking water. Both the USGS and the U.S. Department of Agriculture have verified the presence of pesticides and pesticide byproducts in drinking water sources throughout the nation. While in the majority of these cases, pesticide detection levels were below existing human health benchmarks for those pesticides that have standards, USGS found a number of instances where pesticide detection levels were above acceptable levels. Similarly, even in those instances where detection levels are below acceptable levels, there is still legitimate concern on long-term, low-level exposure to pesticides, especially to the health of children, pregnant women, and the elderly. In my view, the combination of these factors, plus the uncertainty created by increased detection of pesticide chemical mixtures, and the fact that modern drinking water treatment technologies are not designed to detect or remove pesticides, compels me to move cautiously on any proposal that would permanently eliminate options for controlling the amount of pesticides being released into the nation's water. In light of these concerns, and in light of the fact that the legislation before us provides for a permanent Clean Water Act exemption for pesticide use, during the markup of this bill in the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, I offered a simple, common-sense amendment to require Congress to revisit this issue in 5 years, when we have a clearer picture on whether FIFRA is sufficiently protective of human health and water quality from pesticide contamination. If, in 5 years, we were to see progress in reducing pesticide contamination in surface and groundwaters, then we would have more information to justify a permanent Clean Water Act exemption for pesticide use. In my view, we simply do not have this critical information before us today. This simple concept was echoed by a former Bush administration official who was recently quoted as saying that when it comes to enacting statutory exemptions from environmental regulatory requirements, it is appropriate to periodically review whether the exemption continues to be supported by data and science. Based on a commitment from the chairman of the full committee to work with me on this issue before the bill was to come to the floor, I withdrew my amendment and I voted yes in the markup. Unfortunately, to date, my concerns remain unaddressed, and yet here we are today, considering this bill under the suspension of the rules, where there is no opportunity to debate the issues I and several of my colleagues raised at the committee markup. It seems that the push to vote today on this bill is so great that it has stretched the bounds of traditional member-to-member commitments to resolve legitimate differences on issues of critical importance to us all, especially related to the protection of human health and the environment. I am aware that many of my colleagues in several constituencies have pushed for immediate consideration of this bill to respond to the looming court-ordered deadline for the Clean Water Act permitting on April 9th. I agree that concerns expressed by states and pesticide applicators and how they could be expected to comply with a yet unreleased pesticide general permit by the April deadline were legitimate. However, that deadline has now been extended by the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals until October 31, 2011. It appears, therefore, that we have additional time to work on this issue and to resolve some of the concerns expressed by several members of the committee. Mr. Speaker, I believe a more prudent course would be to take the time necessary and work together to address the concerns of both sides in a manner that minimizes regulatory duplication, makes sense for pesticide applicators in the states, and addresses the concerns related to public health and water quality. I reluctantly urge a no vote on H.R. 872 under suspension of the rules so that I may continue to work with my colleagues on improving this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Crawford.
1 minute for Mr. Crawford from Arkansas.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of H.R. 872 because the last thing the agriculture needs is another regulation. Pesticides are an integral part of our nation, of ensuring that our nation continues to produce the world's most abundant, safe, and affordable food supply. As it stands today, pesticides must already go through a minimum of 125 tests before being registered for use. On top of that, they're subject to strict labeling and usage requirements. If we don't pass this bill, our farmers will be required to obtain permits that require them to state the amount of pesticides they will use for a 5-year period. That's not only next to impossible, it would be an expensive and time-consuming process that will harm American agriculture as well as cost jobs. Thank you very much. I yield back the balance.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield 4 minutes to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Napolitano.
The gentlelady from California is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 872, the reduction of regulatory burdens in its current form. At issue, the exemption in the bill means that no Clean Water Act permit would be required for pesticide application to water bodies that are already impaired by pesticides. Now, most pesticide applications in the United States are done in accordance with FIFRA, as you well heard. According to USGS, the report of 2006 on pesticides and frequently are present in streams and groundwater, as you have just heard, at levels that exceed the human health benchmark and occur in many streams at levels that affect aquatic life or fish-eating wildlife. In this data, the states provide EPA, more than 16,000 miles of rivers and streams, 1,380 miles of bays and estuaries, and 370,000 acres of lakes in the United States are currently impaired or threatened by pesticides. EPA suggests estimates may be low because many of these states do not test for or monitor all the different pesticides that are currently being used. I am very concerned of the effect these pesticides have on the health of our rivers, on our streams, and especially the drinking water supplies of all our citizens, especially the most vulnerable, the young, the elderly, and the poor and disenfranchised people who have no other representation. Mr. Speaker, I do ask unanimous consent to place into the record 2 EPA reports on how pesticides in California are the #1 cause of impairments of water quality. These are 1,787 causes in 162 water entities in California alone. This means that in all the waters in the states that are found through testing and monitoring to be impaired or polluted under the Clean Water Act, pesticides, again, pesticides are the most significant cause of those problems. We hear that pesticide application is already regulated under FIFRA and that the Clean Water Act review is not needed. I understand the concerns about the duplication of effort and the need to minimize the impacts the regulations have on small business or business at large. However, I am still very concerned that these pesticides are having a very significant impact on water quality and that we are creating this exemption from water quality protection requirements without considering the impacts to the waters that are already impaired in pesticides as they are in California. And this, in turn, means costing our ratepayers, our water users, hundreds of millions of dollars to filter these pollutants out of the water before it is potable. This is something I deal with on an ongoing basis as the ranking member of Subcommittee on Water and Power. Not even the aquifers that are contaminated by the continued use of pesticides and fertilizers. Multi-million in my area cleanup effort of a Superfund site that has pesticides as one of the #1 contaminants that has been made into a Superfund about 15 years ago. I do oppose this bill. I do need further study on this issue before taking this very drastic step to re-regulate pesticides that affect our nation's water. And again, I urge my colleagues on both sides to vote no on this bill. And thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back my balance of my time.
Without objections, the items will be inserted. The gentlelady from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to allow the Chairman of the Interior, Environment and Related Agencies Subcommittee on Appropriations 2 minutes, my good friend from Idaho, Mr. Simpson.
The gentleman from Idaho is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I rise today in support of H.R. 872, the Reducing Regulatory Burdens Act of 2011. This bill is a much-needed legislative fix that clarifies how pesticide application should be regulated. Congress never intended for pesticide applications that are already regulated under FIFRA to also require permits under the Clean Water Act. Yet because the federal court did not interpret congressional intent correctly in 2009, Congress must act to ensure that farmers, ranchers, forest managers, and other water users, as well as mosquito abatement districts and local governments, won't face unnecessary and duplicative regulations that would make it more difficult to do their jobs. Everyone here supports our water supplies from polluters acting in violation of our nation's environmental laws and regulations. But it is also clear that pesticides used around streams to spray for mosquitoes and other pests are already adequately regulated under statute. Adding another layer of regulation by requiring NPDES permits for application of these pesticides doesn't make them safer. It only piles unnecessary paperwork on top of day-to-day operations for small businesses, farmers, and local governments. My good friend from Oregon mentioned that in Oregon the application is only 3 pages long, so why should it be a problem? It misses the point. It doesn't matter if it's 1 page long or 100 pages long. The question is unnecessary dual regulation. The legislation before us today would clarify Congress's intent that existing FIFRA regulations are adequate for aquatic pesticide use and provide needed certainty for farmers and ranchers who provide our nation's food supply. I urge my colleagues to support this important legislative fix and yield back the balance of my time.
The lady from Ohio reserves balance for time. The gentleman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire as to how many other speakers there are on the other side?
Ms. Schmidt has one.
One speaker.
Okay, I will continue to reserve.
Thank you. Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire to the balance of the time for this side for both myself and Mr. Gibbs?
Mr. Gibbs is 5 1/4 minutes. Ms. Schmidt has 1 1/2.
All right, I yield the balance of my time
has 3.
To Mr. Berg from North Dakota.
The gentleman from North Dakota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
I rise today to strongly urge my colleagues to pass this legislation to protect the American farmer from the overreaching of the EPA and its regulation. If this ruling were to stand, the EPA would have full discretion over controlling the buffer zone for chemicals on crops near water sources. Now, I've talked with farmers in North Dakota, and they rely on herbicides like Roundup to produce a good crop and to prevent weeds from growing. Most of central North Dakota sits in a rich area called the Prairie Pothole region. Many of these farmers plant on land that is within this EPA buffer zone. This ruling would prevent these farmers from raising a good crop on this land. If this ruling goes into effect, it will require over 6 million new permits, and those will need to be issued to hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of farmers. If they don't comply, they'll be forced with a fine of up to $37,000 per day per incident. We know overregulation hurts American business. Overregulation hurts family farms. I strongly urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this legislation. I thank you, and I yield the remainder of my time.
Gentleman, the gentleman's time has expired. From New York. New York is recognized.
I have no speakers left. Is the gentleman prepared to close, or?
I reserve the balance of my time. I'm prepared to close, but I reserve my balance of time.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will be the last speaker on our side. I just want to make a couple of points. There does appear to be strong bipartisan agreement I know it passed out of the Ag Committee on a unanimous vote. There was a very heavy vote for it in the T&I Committee. My reservations are rooted in the fact that I believe that we are rushing to a judgment in terms of making this statute permanent. I believe that we have ample evidence to suggest that we don't know enough about pesticide impairment of water bodies, both surface and groundwater, to determine whether or not it is prudent for us to make a permanent exemption to the Clean Water Act. And so when I offered the amendment, which I then withdrew, for a 5-year sunset so that we could assess whether or not this action is the correct one, I believe that I was acting in a very prudent and defensible way, and I'm very disappointed that, again, that this was an issue that we rushed to the floor in a form where we were unable to amend so that we could get this bill passed. And now the urgency of time has become much less pronounced because of the court ruling that was just announced this past Monday with respect to delaying the implementation of the court ruling until the end of October. Second point, I know it's very popular to talk about the Environmental Protection Agency as if they are in some ways the source of all evil in this world. This is an issue, it's important to clarify, this is not an issue that the EPA sought. We are here today because of a court ruling. And in fact, for years, decades, FIFRA has been the controlling legislation with respect to pesticide application, and the Clean Water Act has not been invoked. And in fact, the EPA in 2006 took a position that they would not engage in a process that would supersede FIFRA. It was that decision that was overturned by the Sixth Circuit Court. We all want to come up with a way to handle this. We all recognize that pesticide application is something that is very important. I represent the largest agricultural county in the state of New York, and this is an issue that's very important to my farmers. But my farmers also recognize that they want to see to it that federal policy is, in fact, consistent with their best interests. There are no better environmentalists in this country than our farmers. They need clean air. They need clean water in order for them to do their jobs. So as I say, I am opposed, reluctantly so, and I very much hope that as this goes forward and is considered by the Senate, if it in fact is considered by the Senate, that we will take our time, we will craft legislation that we can all support, and that we will particularly have legislation that has a sunset period so that we can evaluate whether or not we are right in taking this action today. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, how much time do I have?
5¼ minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to address a few of the concerns raised by my colleague, the ranking member of my committee. Sunset provision. It's not really necessary because this Congress can take it up anytime they want. They don't have to wait 5 years. They can take it up next week, next year. So I think that's just making a kind of a statement. A couple of things I want to address. There was a reference to the geological survey. That reference was a report done over 10 years ago, and really what the detections we're finding in pesticides in our water bodies is a lot of those pesticide pollutions from what we call legacy pollutants from years ago. And some of those detections are pesticides that haven't been used in the United States for many years. And also, a majority of these detections are in very, very low concentrations. We do have the technology to detect parts per trillion, where not too many years ago it was parts per million, which are well below human health benchmarks. As I said, the data is old. EPA in the last 10 years or so does regulate the pesticides. They certify pesticides that come into the market and the amounts they can be used and under FIFRA. So that I think that is working. The EPA can pull a product off the market if they deem necessary if there's a problem. The pesticides we're using today, and I'm speaking now as a farmer, are more biodegradable. They don't have the residue impact, legacy. They don't stay around. They don't stick around the soil. They break down the soil. Matter of fact, so many of our pesticides now break down so fast that farmers have to time the application to make sure they kill the weeds, and there's enough time that it's not too soon that the crop, what we call cover crop, shade out the sun for the weeds to come up underneath the canopy. And so that's important. So we're using less pesticides. The numbers will show that American agriculture is using less pesticides in lesser amounts and safer pesticides with the biodegradable aspect that we're seeing. I think it's also important to keep in mind that this bill, it will help bring certainty. You know, agriculture producers, municipalities have to spray for mosquitoes this summer. They know what the rules are. They have certainty to move forward by passing this legislation. This legislation does not stop the EPA having control over the regulation of pesticides and the certification of pesticides. And again, many states also have pesticide applicator certification. Depending on the pesticide, make a lot of applicators go through the same process. So there's some stringent rules and regulations in place. And I would contend that FRFRA is working. If it's not, then if my colleagues on the other side of the aisle feel that's not working, then we need to address FRFRA and have a bill to work on that and debate that issue. But I think you'll find out that the agriculture is moving in a safer manner to protect the environment, and this bill will keep the FRFRA in place and the EPA under their authority and their control to protect the environment and public safety when it comes especially to mosquito control districts. So I urge the passage of 872, and I yield the rest of my time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
It's back the balance of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 872 as amended? Those in favor say aye, and those opposed say no. Those opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. No. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being affirmative, the rules are suspended.
Mr. Speaker,
The gentleman from New York.
I request the yeas and nays on this measure.
The yeas and nays are requested, and all those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. Sufficient number have risen, and yeas and nays are ordered pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20. Further proceedings on this question will be postponed. The chair lays before the House the following personnel request.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Barton of Texas from noon today and for the balance of the week.
Without objection, the request is granted. Purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Request permission to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, gasoline has reached nearly $4 a gallon, and 60% of the American people want the administration to open up offshore drilling. Yet the administration ignores the will of the people, remaining defiant in their war on domestic energy. They continue to block access to American natural resources, refusing to issue timely drilling permits despite a federal court order to do so. However, the President has announced that the U.S. is going to help somebody drill for oil. We're going to send money, billions of dollars, to Brazil and their state-owned oil company. They will use American money to drill off their coast, and then we will buy the oil back from Brazil. Isn't that lovely? It's mind-boggling and infuriating that instead of developing our own domestic energy supply and creating jobs in America for Americans, the administration wants to become more dependent on foreign oil. Instead of propping up foreign energy companies, we need to allow American workers to drill in American waters. It is wrong for the administration to prevent the development of our own natural resources while promoting the drilling off the shores of other countries. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Hawaii rise? So ordered for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, today H.R. 1250 was introduced. Congresswoman Hirono along with Mr. Young from Alaska, were among those with myself who signed on to this bill. It is the Native Hawaiian Government Reorganization Act of 2011. This is a very misunderstood act, but what does it do? It really establishes us as meeting the fiduciary obligations that we have to the Native Hawaiians. This is a trust obligation that's been created long ago with the creation of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act of 1920. 1920, Mr. Speaker. In addition to that, when Hawaii became a state in 1959, in it was contained really a public trust obligation for the betterment of Native Hawaiians as defined by the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. And then, of course, in Public Law 103-150, we created the concept of the apology resolution. And in that, recognize that we owe a special apology to the Native Hawaiians and a process of reconciliation. This is what this act will do. It will give us the right to make things correct. And that is why I ask that you, along with the rest of the colleagues, support this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The request for 1-minute speeches. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th of 2011, the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader. Recognized for 60 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. A lot of discussion here on the floor around Washington and across this nation about the American financial situation. Some people say America's broke. There couldn't be anything further from the truth than that statement. America is a strong, vibrant economy that far and away is the largest economy in the world. We are nowhere near broke. We do have a problem. We're running at a current deficit, and that deficit is expected to grow. But to understand the deficit and to begin the process of addressing it, we need to understand from whence it came. And so I'm going to start this little discussion out with hopefully an opportunity to get a sense of how it is that the American deficit has risen to the point where it is today. Really, we need to look back to Ronald Reagan period. During the Ronald Reagan period, he ended his presidency with a projected $1.4 trillion deficit for the 10 years beyond his presidency. So we look at these things saying, okay, Reagan had 8 years, and then what was projected as a result of the policies during his presidency? Well, what was projected was that the American deficit would grow by $1.4 trillion. George Bush the first came into office, and at the end of his presidency, 4 years, the projection for the 10 years after he left office, continuing the policies that were in place at the end of his presidency, the deficit would grow to $3.3 trillion. Similarly, the Clinton administration was in office for 8 years, and the policies that were put in place during those 8 years were projected to literally wipe out the American deficit. Literally, gone. $5.6 trillion surplus as a result of the policies that were put in during the Clinton period. Those policies were tax policies. Those were the expenditure policies, a policy that we call today the pay-go policy. That is, if you're going to start a new program, how are you going to pay for it? If you're going to cut taxes, what are you going to reduce in the expenditure pattern? So Reagan, $1.4 trillion deficit projected beyond his presidency. Bush, add another $3.3 trillion. Clinton comes along, 8 years, deficits turn into a whopping surplus and literally paying off the American debt. George W. Bush comes in 2001, and then right off the bat, major tax cuts, not associated with spending cuts, but just major tax cuts. That was in 2001, followed up with a second round of major tax cuts in 2003, and in between, a whole new Medicare entitlement, adding a new expenditure at the same time that taxes were being reduced. And for those of you that remember that period in 2001, we did have 9/11, and immediately we started the Afghanistan war. I think most of us would agree that that was the right thing to do, but it was not paid for. It was actually borrowed money that paid for the early Afghanistan war. Followed a couple of years later, 18 months later, with the Iraq War, which once again was not paid for, but rather borrowed money. The result of all of that and the total pullback of the American government from regulating the financial industry, the housing markets, was the Great Recession. At the end of the George W. Bush period, it was projected by the CBO, Nonpartisan Budget Office, that the deficit would grow by $11.5 trillion if the same policies were left in place. So where is today's deficit coming from? It's coming from the Reagan period, the first Bush period, the Clinton policies terminated, and the George W. Bush policies put in place, leaving us with a projected $11.5 trillion deficit for the next 10 years. Now, the rest of the story is that as a result of the Great Recession, the Obama administration came into office looking at this situation. An economy that was headed into not a recession but a depression, and a huge deficit. That was put on Mr. Obama's plate the day he took office. To deal with the Great Recession that could have become a Great Depression, a stimulus program was put in place, and it was expensive. And a bailout of Wall Street was actually put in place during the last 2 months of the George W. Bush administration. Combination of those was somewhere, $1.5 trillion, $600 billion, a huge whopping sum of money, but done for a good purpose. And I don't know many economists, in fact I know of none, that would say it was not necessary. It was necessary that we deal with the Wall Street collapse. Successfully stabilized Wall Street, the financial industry. Could have been done different. Most of that money has now been repaid. The money that was spent, about $750 billion on stimulating the economy, was similarly successful in stabilizing the economy and causing it to rebound slowly, but nonetheless rebound. Here we are today debating whether the best way to deal with the deficit. We have a proposal from the President that over the next 5 to 6 years would significantly reduce the annual deficit, not creating a situation such as ended the Clinton administration, but bringing the deficit back into a situation that is sustainable. That's the President's proposal. Based upon holding steady, no growth in the federal budget over the next 5 years, having the economy bounce back, ending one of the tax breaks that was put in place by George W. Bush back in 2003, that is the high income, that is the millionaire-billionaire tax break, which is still in place but would end under the President's proposal. It is following along closely the recommendations of the Deficit Reduction Commission that was appointed. Now, that's the President's proposal. What we're debating on the floor, beginning early this year with H.R. 1, House Resolution 1, continuing resolution to fund the government for the remainder of the year, was a $60 billion reduction in the discretionary expenditures of this government. No one believed that that would have a significant impact on the long-term deficit problem. But it would have a very significant impact on vital programs that are necessary to continue the operations of this government. So what are we to do? H.R. 1 passed this House. It was rejected by the Senate. And for me, that was the right thing to do, because H.R. 1 was estimated by two different economists, not Democratic economists, but independent economists, that it would kill 700,000 jobs across this nation, immediately increase the unemployment in America, reducing tax revenues. Unemployed people don't pay taxes, but simultaneously increasing the expenditures, unemployment insurance, welfare, and the like. That's not a very wise thing to do, but that's what our colleagues on the Republican side suggested we should do. And it passed. Unanimous Republican support. I think there are 3 or 4 Democrats that voted for it. I think they were wrong. I think the Republicans were wrong. That doesn't solve the deficit. You cannot take 14% of the federal budget, which happens to be the discretionary expenditures that were targeted by our Republican colleagues in H.R. 1, and expect to do anything meaningful about the deficit. The deficit has to be dealt with over a long period of time, and it has to be dealt with in such a way that we actually put in place the foundations for strong economic growth. What are those foundations? Well, in my view, there are 6 of them. If this economy is going to grow soon, midterm, and late, that is in the years ahead, we have to have the best educated workforce in the world. So in the Republican proposal was an elimination of funding for higher education, funding for the Pell Grants that allows young men and women and older men and women to go into the university system. Not a wise thing to do. Second thing, if we're going to have a foundation of good, solid economic growth into the future, we need to have the best research in the world. And once again, the proposal, H.R. 1 and the 2 subsequent continuing resolutions that have funded the government, cut research, critical research, at our national laboratories. Nearly $800 million of funding for the Department of Energy research programs would be eliminated, laying off some 6,000 researchers, PhDs, scientists at the national laboratories that are working on research for energy production. No one in this nation would argue that we do not have an energy crisis. Check out the price of gasoline. We have a serious energy crisis. Yet, the proposal would go right at the heart of the research that we need in order to solve the energy problem. Conservation, nuclear, cleanup of nuclear, research into photovoltaic, geothermal, all of the renewable energy research largely reduced and in some cases totally eliminated. Healthcare. The fastest growing segment of our economy is healthcare. Research at the National Institute of Health wiped out, largely reduced. What kind of policy is that? If we're going to have a strong economy, we need to have a well-educated workforce, we need the research, and thirdly, we need to take up the issue of manufacturing. We need to make the things that come out of research. Mr. Speaker, I think it's time for me to yield to our colleague from the Rules Committee. So I yield.
Thank you. For what purpose the gentleman from Florida rise?
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk a privileged report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the rule. Title of the rule.
Report to accompany House Resolution 189, resolution providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 658 to amend Title 49 United States Code to authorize appropriations for the Federal Aviation Administration for fiscal years 2011 through 2014 to streamline programs, create efficiencies, reduce waste, and improve aviation safety and capacity, to provide stable funding for the national aviation system and for other purposes.
Refer to the House calendar and ordered printed. The gentleman from California may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before that important rule was brought to the floor for consideration, I was discussing how we can grow the American economy and where the critical investments are. Spoke of education, research, and then you have to make the things that come from the research. Manufacturing really does matter. If we were to take the American manufacturing sector, as weak as it is today, it would still rank as the 9th biggest economy in the world. Manufacturing in the United States took an enormous hit during the Great Recession. About 25% of the jobs were lost. Were in manufacturing. We hollowed out our manufacturing sector. If we're to grow this economy, if we are to have a serious reduction in the deficit, then we're going to have to make sure that manufacturing returns as a principal part of the American economy. I'm going to move on with the other three elements and then come back to manufacturing. We need to have a very strong infrastructure. This is everything from water to sanitation to transportation, rail systems, air systems, and one of the things that was just mentioned on the floor with this rule has to do with the air transportation system in the United States. That infrastructure is critical. Yet in the proposal that we've had from our Republican colleagues, we're actually weakening the infrastructure system of this nation. That's not a wise thing to do, but nonetheless, our economy depends upon that infrastructure. The international investments are necessary. We need to export. We cannot find our economy growing if we continue to rely only on imports. They may be cheap, but in their cheapness, they destroy the American manufacturing sector. So we need to keep that in mind as a principal investment that we need to make. It doesn't come cheaply. It requires us to spend money on the Department of Commerce that is out there helping to open markets for America. It requires us to finance the Export-Import Bank and other federal government agencies that actually support the export of goods and services from America. And of course, we've got to pay attention to the defense of this nation. in the Defense Department, we need to always strive for efficiency. Now, I happen to oppose the war in Afghanistan. It's costing us about $120 billion a year. My view is we ought to end that quickly, spend some money on focusing directly on the real threat, that is the threat from al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations. We'll come to that in a different discussion. But those are the 6 critical investments: education, research, manufacturing, infrastructure, international trade, and defense. Are we doing well at those? Not if my Republican colleagues get their way with regard to the discretionary budget cuts. There are some things that we can do that are not expensive. In fact, they actually will create jobs with no additional federal expenditure. Let me turn to that at this moment. Now, my Democratic colleagues and I have developed a program that we call Make It in America. Make it in America. If America is going to make it, then we have to make it in America. What are we making? We need to make all of the things that this economy and this world needs for energy security: photovoltaic, geothermal, the new biofuels, the advanced biofuels, all of those things in the energy sector that allow us to prosper and to address the energy crisis, including, and I know, the problem of Japan and the nuclear systems there, but 20% of our energy presently comes from nuclear, and that's going to be part of the future. So we need to make sure that we make it well, safely, and that those systems are made in America. Manufacturing matters, and we need to make sure that our manufacturing sector is up to speed and actually making things in America. We cannot count on the Chinese or the Indians or any other nation to provide us with our manufactured goods. And the reason is that's where the well-paid middle-class jobs are. It's been hollowed out over the last decade by, I think, unwise policies, but nonetheless we can restore it. And let me tell you a couple of ways that we're proposing to do this in the Democratic caucus. I love these charts. They seem to actually make a lot of sense and help display what we're talking about. If we're going to make it in America, we need to make sure that we are educating and researching. And so these are crucial investments that I've talked about before. Research, the health sector, science, well-educated workforce with teachers that are capable of doing what we call the STEM, the science, technology, engineering, manufacturing kinds of education, and we need to make sure that our workers are prepared to take on these jobs. So this is the first step. That's the education and the research step of it. And these are investments, and we need to make those investments. Let me give you a couple of other examples of where public policy really becomes important. Photovoltaic, invented in America. Wind turbines, I mean, they've been around a long, long time, windmills and the like, but many of the modern technologies that are in the wind turbine system are American research and, of course, transportation. It turns out that we don't really do much of this, or at least a year ago we didn't do much of this. We were importing the solar systems, the photovoltaic systems, importing many of the wind turbines that are now out there in the wind farms providing us with energy, and importing from other countries buses and trains and light rail systems. What we say in the Democratic caucus is each of these are programs that are subsidized or paid for with your tax money. There are subsidies for solar photovoltaic systems. Good. We need to do these kinds of things for energy security, and it's a good place to spend tax money to encourage the development of those kinds of systems. All well and good. But where are those solar panels made? Are they made in America or are they made overseas? Our view, and my own personal legislation, is if you want to use American taxpayer monies to help you buy a solar system either on your business or on your home, then you buy American-made solar systems. If your transit district wants to buy a bus using our tax dollars, this is the excise tax on gasoline, 18.5 cents for gasoline and 25+ cents for diesel fuel. If you want to go buy a bus from your local transit district, good. We need public transportation. But if you're going to use the public's tax money to buy that bus, then you buy a bus that's made in America. Make it in America. If you're using our tax dollars as a transit district or as a business or as a homeowner with a solar panel or a bus, then you use that tax money to buy an American-made bus. Similarly with wind turbines. This is a personal thing for me. In 1978, I authored the first state legislation for wind, solar tax credits to get that industry started. And it did start. Altamont Hills in California, which I currently represent, has the oldest wind farm in America. Good. We're rebuilding those turbines, putting in new modern turbines, and we're expanding the wind industry in this nation. Good. We need to do that. And we're using our tax money to subsidize it. That's good, too. But where is that wind turbine built? Is it built in Europe, Spain, Germany, Belgium, or is it built in America? Too many of these have been built in other countries using our tax money. And I'm saying with my legislation and the support of others that if you're going to use American taxpayer money to invest in wind turbines, then you buy American-made equipment, period. We don't need to buy Chinese wind turbines when we can make those in America. These are ways in which we can rebuild our manufacturing base. Turns out that in the San Francisco Bay Area, there's the Alameda Contra Costa Transit District that has within that district one of the last remaining bus manufacturers in America. But until very recently, that transit district refused to buy buses from a bus manufacturer in that district that was making buses that were every bit as good as buses made anywhere in the world. They've recently changed that policy. Similarly, in the San Francisco Bay Area, the Bay Area Rapid Transit District, BART, was buying trains and wanted to continue to buy over $300 million of trains from foreign manufacturers. Many of us said, whoa, 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 stop, time out, don't do that. Let's buy trains that are made in America. So Siemens, a German company, has established a manufacturing plant and upgrading a long-existing manufacturing plant in Sacramento to prepare itself to successfully bid for the manufacture of high-speed trains in California and around the nation, as well as light rail systems, which they are now and have been for some time producing in the Sacramento manufacturing plant. Good. That's how we can use our tax dollars to rebuild the American manufacturing base. As we do that, we rebuild a vital part of America's economy. That part of America's economy that was traditionally the heart and soul of Middle America, the great American manufacturing sector. This is possible. Does it take new money? It takes a redirection of money that we have been spending for some time. And let me add one more thing to it. As we look at the renewable industry, let us think about where we can find additional money to enhance the renewable energy industry. For 1 century, America has subsidized, through various tax breaks, the oil industry. And we did that for the purpose of creating a very strong, viable oil industry that provided us with energy. It was eminently successful. The oil industry is the most profitable industry in America and probably around the world. Very, very successful. Do they need a continuation of tax breaks? Well, if you ask them, of course. Everybody wants a tax break, but do they need it? Not when they're running over the last 10 years just short of $1 trillion of profit. The American oil industry in the last decade has earned $950 billion of profit. Do they need a tax break anymore? I think not. I think we take that tax break, which depending upon how much and whose estimate is somewhere north of $10 billion, maybe as much as $20 billion a year, and use that money to build our renewable energy sector, subsidizing these kinds of things: photovoltaic, advanced biofuels, algae fuels, wind turbines, and to enhance our transportation sector. These are strategies that we ought to employ. However, what's happening today, instead of taking the long-term view and making critical investments that actually will give us the foundation and the start to rebuild the American economy, we're going the other direction. I should say my Republican colleagues are going the other direction. Many of us think it's the wrong direction. We should not shortchange those investments that actually will create short-term and long-term economic growth. It's critical that we continue to invest in those 6 things: education, research, transportation, manufacturing. Obviously, we have to continue to invest in national defense, but we better be very, very wise. As we do these investments, and in fact in everything the government does, we must always strive for 2 goals: that every program be effective, that is, that it actually achieves its stated purpose, and that it be done efficiently. I call these the 2 E's: efficient and effective. If it's not efficient, then change the program so that it would be efficient. If it's ineffective and inefficient, it should be terminated. Very simple. But if it is effective and efficient, then maybe we ought to continue it. Now, in this recent week, we've had our Republican colleagues put forth 4 bills that literally terminate all of the federal government programs, save 2, to rebuild the housing industry in America, and to, more importantly, help those families that are in desperate trouble with their mortgage. Those programs, some of them were ineffective, necessary but not yet effective, and not up to the kind of efficiency that we would want. That doesn't mean they should be terminated. That means they should be modified because the problem continues to exist. There is a homeowner mortgage problem in America of enormous importance. Some 10 million American homes are underwater. It's a problem. We've got to find a way of dealing with that. Not just ignore it, not just to wipe out programs that we would need, but we need to have efficiency. And so we look for not a bill that would eliminate it, but rather a bill that would modify, create more efficiency, and continue to address the problem. To this date, our Republican colleagues have only moved to terminate, not to replace, not to rebuild. Similarly, with health care. Only a bill to terminate, not a bill to improve, when we know that we've got an ongoing problem. I'm going to just wrap this up and let it go at where we are, but let me go back and review very, very quickly. A raging debate here in Congress about the deficit. Where did it come from? How did we get to where we are? And how do we solve this problem in the future? The deficit didn't start with the Obama administration. It started way back, actually, with the Reagan, a little bit before the Reagan administration, the George Bush, the first administration, dramatically altered by Clinton, which actually would have, if those policies had continued, created a surplus, almost wiping out the total debt of America, and then run up big time during the George W. Bush administration. These are projections 10 years following, if you'd continued the same policies, what would happen. That's where it started. And then the Great Recession and the effort now to deal with that. The Obama administration has put forth a proposal that follows closely along with the recommendations of the Deficit Reduction Commission that said, don't do anything that would harm the current recovery, like make an austerity program, like make massive cuts. Yet our Republican colleagues have done and proposed exactly that. Fortunately, the Senate has not gone along with that. But we're nickel and diming our way towards $30 billion of cuts that may, in fact, cause us to see a decline rather than a continued growth in the economy. We must watch that very carefully. So that's the deficit piece of it. Manufacturing matters. We need to be sure that we rebuild our manufacturing sector. Many different pieces of legislation. Tax policy. I didn't mention this earlier, but one of the tax policies put forth by the Democrats last December and actually went into law was to encourage investment by private companies in capital equipment, allowing those companies to write off immediately in the first year 100% of the cost of capital equipment. A good idea. Unfortunately, very few of our Republicans voted for that. In the manufacturing sector, let's make it in America. Let's use our tax dollars to make it in America. All of the energy programs, transportation programs, our tax dollars, use it to buy American-made equipment. And finally, research and education. Research and education. This is not where the cuts should occur, yet our Republican colleagues are suggesting that's exactly where it should happen. Major cuts in education, major cuts in research, energy, education, health care. You cannot make those cuts and expect this economy to be competitive. One little fact that I just heard about today is that it is expected in the coming year that the Chinese economy will produce more scientific advancements than the American economy. This will be the first time in perhaps 3/4 of a century that the United States government will give up its lead on scientific advancements. This is not the time for this nation to make cuts in our science agenda, whether it's in the medical, healthcare area, the energy area, or any of the other kinds of research that we have always been the leader. Food for thought, things for us to consider. I would like the American people to be aware of the real deficit story. You cannot solve it by making massive cuts in just 14% of the budget. Yet that's what our Republican colleagues are doing. We need a long-term plan, one that's 5 years, 10 years, to bring our budget back into balance, and we can do it. It was done during the Clinton period. And this little chart here gives you some idea of 1/2 of how the budget, how the Clinton period brought about a budget surplus. This is the spending side, and this is the expenditures of the American government as a percentage of the economy. During the Reagan-Bush period, it was up in the 24, let me take a look at this. 22, 23% of the American economy was in the was for government expenditures, dropped down to 21, but basically bounced between 21 and 23%. During the Clinton period, as a result of policies that were put in place during his period, pay-go, reinventing government, and other governmental policies, we saw a steady decline in the percentage of the economy that was going to the federal government. At the same time, we had very strong economic growth. Those are the two of the three things that operate together. There was also a Clinton tax increase that took place that basically added an additional tax burden at the very, very top of the income categories. So the combination of those reductions in the percentage of the economy that was used, good economic growth, and a tax increase that occurred in the very early period, particularly a tax increase on the very wealthy, led to a surplus. George W. Bush came in 2001, 2, and things reversed. First of all, an increase in the percentage of the economy that went to government, principally the Medicare drug program and the wars. And then this very, very steep rise that occurred right at the end of the Bush administration as a result of two things. One, a plummeting of the American economy as the Great Recession took hold in 2008, and the effort to deal with the Great Recession with the stimulus, and right here at the end of the Bush 2, the financial bailout. And so that's why we saw this extremely high line. Now you notice that in this last period, which is the 2010-11 period, we've begun to see a decline once again in the percentage of the government, of the economy that is government spending. And if we follow carefully the budget that's been put together by the Obama administration, this line will continue to fall back into the 20%, 21% range, bringing back into balance the federal expenditure. It cannot and will not happen overnight. It's going to take us 5 years, maybe even longer, to bring this thing back into balance. Keep in mind the words that were used by the recommendation of the Budget Deficit Commission. Don't do anything immediately to harm the American economy by making rapid, unnecessary, unwise cuts in the federal expenditure. That will put people out of work. 700,000 people would lose their jobs immediately if the proposal that was put forth by the Republicans, but fortunately stopped by the Senate. If that had become law, 700,000 jobs immediately lost, and a spike once again in this ratio of government spending. So we've got work to do. We can do this, but we need to take the long vision, and we need to be very careful that we make the critical investments. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the remaining of my time.
The gentleman yield back the balance of his time.